Welcome back. You're watching World Talks, and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Today, we turn our attention to a pivotal moment for European trade and economic strategy as EU member states gather in Brussels to discuss the future of EU-U.S. trade relations. Issues like economic security and strategic partnerships are taking center stage. It is my pleasure to welcome Stefano Mallia, president of the Employers Group at the European Economic and Social Committee. In this conversation, we'll delve into how the EU can strengthen its economic resilience, reduce dependencies on external suppliers, and maintain global competitiveness. Thank you for joining us here on the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a great pleasure. So let's take a look at this meeting that's taking place in Brussels. EU trade ministers meeting there to discuss transatlantic relations and economic security. What do you think are the key priorities that European businesses hope to see reflected in the EU's approach?
Well, I think first and foremost, there are a number of elements which I think policymakers and also the business community need to keep in mind. First and foremost, we have a strong market, a strong internal market. We are an economic entity, a strong economic entity, and we need to be sure and confident of that. That is especially important in the discussions with the US. Secondly, we need to keep calm. I can understand that in all the upheaval that is taking place around us, be it from the US, be it what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, and be it what's happening in other places, there could be a sense of panic and urgency. Urgency there is, but we need to act calmly, especially when it comes to our relationships with the US. And here, if I may, I place a lot of importance on the relationships between the business community in the EU and the business community in the US. My attitude is that politicians come and go, politicians will change, policies will change, and situations will change, but business must remain there.
It's important to have that continuity.
Exactly.
That goes beyond just the political alliances.
Our transatlantic relationship is too important to throw it away or to not give it its due importance. So us as a business community, we are reaching out to our counterparts also in the US, and the message is, let's try and maintain as good a business relationship as possible.
Mm-hmm. So what does strategic autonomy mean in practice for the European businesses? Yeah. How possibly could the EU reduce dependency on non-EU suppliers to maintain this competitiveness?
Yes, what we also need to clarify is what do we mean by strategic autonomy? Because some people think that this is some utopia of cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world and just being able to take care of everything ourselves. This doesn't exist.
It's a global village.
It doesn't exist. First and foremost, keep in mind that even, for example, on rare earth materials, we depend 100% on China. And you said to try and reduce with non-EU operators or players. I don't think that is possible. The reality is that we need to maintain these relationships. We need to calibrate them in a way where there is a fair relationship. So
maybe not reduce, but diversify perhaps.
Yes, and what I was going to come to is that we need to ensure that we set up relationships with partners we can trust. Mm-hmm. So partners that we can work with. America is still one of them, despite of what is happening. But also, if you look at places like Canada, for example, which Canada is not mentioned that often as a possible partner, but they are important partners. And now in terms of strategic autonomy, yes, we need to reduce our dependency, for example, for energy. Mm-hmm. We still buy energy products from Russia, in spite of all the efforts being done, but we have to accept that this will be a gradual process. To reduce, for example, our dependency on energy, we need to invest more in the grid, we need to invest more in the green transition, we need to invest more in renewables, so these are things which take time and a lot of money.
So what would you consider to be perhaps the biggest threats or biggest challenges when it comes to global competitiveness of the EU industries?
I would say certainly energy, because at the moment when I say we, I'm talking about Europe, we are paying 2 to 3 times the price of energy that is being paid in the US, and much more vis-a-vis China. So certainly energy. Labor market, I know in Poland you have a very hot labor market, and this is the same situation in a number of member states. And so what's the challenge there? We're not finding people, and we're not finding people with the right skills. And this is a huge problem, especially if we want to move in the so-called green transition.
So how do we troubleshoot that?
Yeah, we can approach that by, first and foremost, in my view, addressing even the education system. The education system, now I'm talking about, again, a bit general, in my view, is too slow to respond to the changes taking place in the labor market. So if we're talking about the Green Deal, new skills for renewable energy and this kind of thing, we need to ensure, or if we're talking about AI, for example, we need to make sure that our education systems are responding as quickly as the developments taking place. And that's where the challenge starts. Then, of course, we have to continue in terms of continuous education, continuous training, and this kind of thing. But we need to make sure that we are pushing our resources in the right areas of growth. This is the main thing.
If we're focusing on education, just a side note, how do we, for example, pull people back into Europe? So let's say we have European citizens who go to study abroad.
Yes,
how do we attract them back?
This is interesting. Of course, you attract them back by providing opportunities. Now, I would say up till very recently, we were losing a lot of our young entrepreneurs, our most, let's say, intelligent entrepreneurs or intelligent people. They were moving out. Why? Because the regulatory environment in the EU is become too burdensome. So to set up a business takes time. There's a lot of costs. The reporting has become impossible. And now because the Commission has realized, what the Commission itself and the Member States, to be fair, have created, i.e. a monster of regulatory burden, now we are trying our best to scramble back a lot of these regulations to try and attract people back. There is an opportunity, I think an obvious opportunity at the moment, with Trump creating all the havoc that he's creating, even back home, where he is also attacking universities and all that.
He's discouraging them a little bit from
leaving.
Actually...
Of course he will. But when you see what he's doing with the research community, for example, there is a clear movement of people now seeking to move out from the US, and that is
he's giving them a lot to think about in terms of staying behind.
He's challenging them, I think, more than anything else.
So what solution, in your opinion, should the EU implement to steer more capital into businesses? Because we've seen the US putting a lot of money through in order to support different businesses. Yeah. This is that's been the motor, the driver of that change, of that development in the US. What has to happen in Europe for that?
I would say, as a start, since we talk about EU being a single market, we need to create a capital markets union, i.e. one market for capital within the EU. If you look at the statistics, companies seek their venture capital from the EU only up to 25%. On the other hand, in the US, they generate 75% of their requirements, and the rest comes, of course, from outside. So clearly, there's a huge opportunity there if we create this capital market, because there is a lot of liquidity around in Europe, but we're not using it for venture capital. We're not using it for our businesses. And for a startup to seek money, it's easier to find it in the US than to find it in the EU. So that is a number one priority in my mind, which is not to underestimate the difficulties, because of course there are a number of difficulties of national protection for, you want to protect your banks, you want to protect your systems, but I think that's the most, and this was also highlighted very much in the Draghi report. Draghi, as you know, came up with a report on competitiveness. Now we talk a lot about reports, but the Draghi report is different and is important because it goes into granular detail in very detailed ways.
It's the report among reports.
Yes, and the Commission, von der Leyen, has taken a decision to center its work program around the Draghi and the Letta reports.
I would like to take a moment to take a look at climate goals and at the future of the Green Deal. Do you think that the EU is moving somewhat away from the Green Deal, considering political and economic pressures? And what is actually the realistic future of energy transition? Okay, so on the Green Deal, there are a number of aspects of course, but I'll try and be as synthetic as possible. Number one, of course, with what is happening around us at this very moment in terms of security, there is a lot of pressure for member states to put money into their defense, into the security. So there is, I would say, security has become the number one priority. If you had to talk about same discussion 3-4 years ago, we would be talking, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, we would be talking about the Green Deal being probably the number one, the green transition. Now it's certainly number two at best. So there's that pressure. However, what we're also, I think the reality on the ground, and we need to say this, is that when the Green Deal was set up, developed, whatever you want to say, by the politicians in Brussels, by the Commission, for example, okay, they set a number of goals without really and truly thinking through on how we're going to achieve those goals. And now we are trying to start to implement the Green Deal to achieve those goals, and we are starting to realize the difficulties and the costs associated with that. Now, the hurdles that have to be jumped. But to be clear, as a business community, we are 100% behind the Green Deal. And my mind frame is that if we don't do it as Europe, okay, if we're not innovative in this field, we will just have to follow what the Americans are creating or what the Chinese are creating. If you look outside of our borders today, you see under Trump, the US is going back to fossil fuels.
but China is investing heavily in clean tech. So clearly China has set its mind.
An interesting shift.
It has set its mind and its direction that its future is clean tech. The States under Trump have gone another direction. Now, I think we need to go into the Green Deal, into clean tech, and that is where we have to follow. But we talk about recalibrating the Green Deal. So now I say nothing is set in stone. So if we're starting to see that there are targets which we might have difficulties to reach within the time frame set, then let's talk about it. Let's see how we can either achieve the targets, or at least if we need a longer time frame, we say it publicly, because companies are investing millions in trying to achieve those targets to join in the green transition. I don't want to be the one who has to tell companies who have invested millions, I'm sorry, but we're not going to reach this target now on the eve, and I'm going to push it 10 years down the line. That would be catastrophic for Europe.
So what would be your solution to strike the right balance between climate goals and actually having this European industry competitive and the European economy?
First of all, they're not mutually exclusive, because some people run away with the idea, you want to achieve competitiveness at the cost of the environment. Absolutely not.
That doesn't have to happen.
Absolutely not, because if we really believe that the future is clean tech, AI, and clean industry, then clearly we can move in the direction of gaining more competitiveness by more investment, more innovation, more skilled labor, and growing, whilst at the same time, of course, taking care of our planet, because we only have, there's, like my kids say, there's no planet B. And we really need to believe it. So I think they are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, I think there's an opportunity for the business community, for Europe to move forward in this direction.
As we're obviously focusing on our part of Europe, we're focusing on Central and Eastern Europe. I wanted to ask about the opportunities for economic cooperation when it comes to the EU and Ukraine. We've seen some movements already taking place in the past few weeks. What is your assessment?
Okay, first and foremost, I must say, and this is not because I am on Polish TV, but I must say that the Polish presidency has been a good presidency. Polish presidency of the EU has been a good presidency, and I am very confident that Poland will become increasingly an important player in the EU. I have seen, of course, these developments taking place over years. I am very aware of the presidency, of course, because I have engaged with the Polish government as well, and with Polish employers. In fact, I have a number of meetings set up. So I think Poland has a very important role to play, both now as a presidency, but I would say in the general shaping of the EU. That's number one. Of course, Poland has also an important role to play vis-à-vis Ukraine. I see Poland as the natural, let's say, partner of Ukraine, although Europe is, but certainly Poland is, I would say, even more. And Poland has played an important part, first and foremost, in taking care of the Ukrainian people who had to flee from the war, but also it is an important point of entry and exchange with Ukraine. Now,
a natural hub.
A natural hub. But now, in terms of talking in general, the European Union and Ukraine, first and foremost, again, my bet is that when peace is achieved, because peace, one way or another, at some point is going to be achieved. This is not a war which can go on forever. At some point, peace will be achieved. We'll have to see at what price.
We're all hoping it's going to happen earlier than later.
Yes, we have to see at what price and of course, in what dynamics. But peace will be achieved. And once peace is achieved, a stable peace is achieved in Ukraine, the Ukrainian economy, in a very short time, will become one of the strongest economies in Europe. Why? Because so much capital is going to flow into it. So much money is going to come, not only from the European Union, but also from Japan, also from America, and other places, that it has the perfect opportunity to modernize its economy almost from scratch. And I think
it will be pretty much from scratch.
And I think that this will make Ukraine one of the strongest economies in the world. So it's certainly our interest to make sure that we protect Ukraine and that we engage with Ukraine. On the other hand, and I must be very transparent about this, of course, Ukraine already today is trying to export as much as it can, especially in agricultural goods, etc. And there is some resistance from businesses in Europe, because, of course, there's added competition.
Obviously, and since you say that this is going to be one of the strongest economies,
so I don't want to come on TV and say open arms for Ukrainian goods and services into Europe, because the reality on the ground is that businesses are reluctant, they're a bit careful, so it will need, I would say, confidence building, and also some time before we have Ukraine very much integrated into the single market. But certainly, There is no way we should think about a future of Europe without Ukraine, and the future of Europe without Ukraine being a strong part of the single market.
And there we're going to put a full stop to our conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very
Stefano
much.
Mallia, President of the Employers Group European Economic and Social Committee. Pleasure to have you in the studio. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
And so this would be all for now on World Talks, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features, and we'll see you there.